Short, scary stories. Film was an ugly child by Orgasm. For as far back as film could fathom, he'd always been an ugly child. In fact, even as a small boy, he'd been told by his parents that he was frightful at best, that he had a beastly face that certainly scared all the rest. For Film's father was married to his sister, Film's mother. The resulting offspring, I'm sure you can imagine, is one probably best smothered, rarely one to be smiled upon by nature, rather one to be shocked and appalled by. Nature's mockery on full display to all who dared take a peek, and then an awed stare. Then occasionally some would weep. Film's facial affliction was one of near indescribable proportions. The doctor scolded the boy's parents for not getting an abortion. Concave, the doctor had said, all grave and grey. This boy's face is near concave. Everywhere Film went, he'd stare into space. People snuck looks and laughed at the monstrous child with the half-moon face. But Film never took it to heart, because Film was smart, special, and people always covet which is special. That's what his mother had told him, and he knew it to be true. Film started getting into his dad's tool shed and sniffing wood glue. Its pungent aroma often nearly sent Film into a coma. As Film grew older, he was forced to begin attending school, of which he detested. For a brief time, his parents were arrested. Social services found out that his home education wasn't up to much. It was apparently so bad that they even held up a doll and asked if he had been touched. Film realised just how bigger than all the other children he was, and it made him feel good. He was really special, truly one of a kind. Film was a few grades behind his age, but he didn't mind. A captive audience now bore his rage. He was the ugly king of the stupid babies, a natural leader among their kind. Film felt like a god, a brand new feeling, a feeling he embraced as if he was no longer odd. Every day he'd screech out the answers first and scribble through every test with a ravenous thirst until eventually they were forced to progress him up one grade for the teacher's sake, who was more than dismayed. This time his peers were not so small and many of them also laughed, but Film didn't care, not at all. He didn't hide because he was special and they weren't, and Film knew they knew it deep down inside. Film flouted fights, opting instead to scree and scree until all around were forced to flee. The boy with the thick tomato nose slapped on the deep centre of his half-moon face, far from his eyes which squinted on the borders as if escaping a sinking ship from both sides. His protruding forehead blocked out the sun. He had a hefty brow that doubled as wide. All hope of salvation lost. That was the look that little Film showed in his stare, the sort of stare that only comes with inbreeding, the pained look of humanity receding. Eventually the disruption became too much, and once more Film was ejected from class, papped off to the next, only this time was different. In this one, he was ultimately last. Now it was no longer a breeze with the questions and writing, and his sense of superiority became less than inviting. How could he be special when he wasn't as smart as the children's, whose faces weren't like God's bad art? from his first accursed batch before he ironed out most of the kinks of which were revived by an unholy union of familial link. Film did what he could to stay on top, fighting and biting and kicking and screaming and spitting, because it's better to be feared than to be loved, and who could love Film with his face all aflame and sunken? So he was removed from the school, and no other would take him. The school system seemed fine just to flunk him. Film became the young mascot for a really bad crowd, a gang of miscreants with whom hard drugs were allowed, meth and crack and speed and pain pills. But not only that, animals were killed. Film was a natural at butchering rodents, twirling tails in his teeth. The gang hooted and hollered. The boy didn't mind, in fact he rather enjoyed it, being laughed with rather than just at, as he giggled and chuckled and went at another rat. The boy soon moved to pulling apart cats, both alive and dead. They went under his steel grip, squashed and squeezed and ripped and torn. Film used his hands until they slipped in the mess, and his latest victim was almost certainly dead. Now his new friends were no longer around, having grown bored of the freak boy with the half-moon face. But Film didn't care, for he found his true calling, mangling things that can tear, and things is how he saw them, all crumpled and done. Not a single one was able to run from the bloody half-moon-faced boy squinting in the sun. The boy named Film was caught in the act with a neighbour's pet cat, already bagged in a sack, and from there they found his grisly killing ground. Over the hill on an old dirt mound. The bones were many and they crunched underfoot of the police, who all soon arrived to investigate. When they realised the scale of Film's crimes, they began to interrogate. But Film didn't mind, for his work was done. They were already dead, and he had his fun. He looked on his works one final time and recorded it forever in rhyme. A rhyme in his mind in which he could reminisce. The only regret was the creature he'd missed. Locked in a cell all padded and white, in his brutal rhyme the young boy named Film would take flight. Now a young man still trapped in his room, Film longed for the day when he'd be let out, for the day when he could finally get back to what life is about.